To a certain extent, it brings together the different elements that we've spoken of throughout the weekend. And for me, it is interesting that now we have a meeting, a motto, which is a way of opening, a key to opening this whole thing, that the shrine in itself becomes an open door to faith, an open door to evangelization, an open door to the new community of faith in the church. Let's look at a few elements where our shrine plays a role. If we consider context in which the Year of Faith has been called, the concern of our Holy Father was the marginalisation not only of Christian value and Christian teaching, but indeed the marginalisation of Christian life, Christian culture. That it's no longer recognised, in some places no longer tolerated, as a way in which we can structure our lives, a way in which we can indeed allow for greater humanity. That was, if you like, one of the great concerns of our Holy Father. And it is almost shocking when we consider to what extent the world has become estranged to what we know as Christian context. I remember a few years ago, near to where my parish was in Manchester, neighbouring parish St Dunstan's, and at Christmas time, the priest in the parish house gardens had put a crib, and he had some people walking past. It's like a high street there, they're going shopping. He had them going past, one commenting to the other, "Lovely garden gnomes." So they had no concept of what the crib wanted to say. You know, in recent years, there's been a battle, should you have a crib in a shopping centre or not. In the Arndale shopping centre, one of the main shopping centres in Manchester, and in the Trafford Centre at the time when it was built, it was the biggest shopping centre in Europe. It's something like 5 acres of shops, all under one roof. A beautiful temple of consummation. And the question was, you know, can you have a crib? Because, you know, if you have a crib, is there not the danger of excluding or offending someone? That's, of course, background. I remember when I was working in Australia, I went to the new Canberra Parliament House. At the time, it was the most modern Parliament House in the world. Canada got one later, and so they're a bit more modern. But the man who did all the communications in IT, Fernando Gonzalez, he belongs to a family group in Canberra. He took me around. And among other things, he brought me to the prayer room in the Houses of Parliament. And he said, one of the men, we also knew he was the private secretary of one of the senators, he also belonged to one of our family groups. He said he had brought a beautiful crucifix, which was brought across from Europe in the first decades of the European occupation of Australia. And it was there for a while. And of course this was 200 years Australia in a European state. And he said someone objected to the crucifix. And now when you come into this prayer room, there's an empty room. There's an old chest on the floor, and that came from one of the ships of the First Fleet. And there's the drawing of a rainbow serpent on the wall, and that's it. So multiculturalism led to lowest common denominator. If someone takes objection, you take it out. If someone takes objection, you don't explain, so they can find a way of understanding, you just take it out. And so the context is that we live in a world that's actually ignorant. And of course there's a second level, the level that Father Kentenich brought on a pedagogical level, and that was the importance of symbols in terms of emotional intelligence. You know, he said our faith should be a loving faith, a faith in love. It should be our hearts that believe as well as our minds. And the importance of symbol to express this love. Then we can look at another level, because of course all of that is lost. You know, nowadays you literally have to explain the symbolism, for example, of one of the medieval works of art, where no one will associate a rainbow with the sign of the covenant. A rainbow in association with the cross is a sign of the new covenant, the resurrection. So many symbols that we know that are used to express God in our life, they don't communicate anything. And therefore, one of the important elements that we have in terms of new evangelization is to find a new way to transport a vital faith to others. And then, of course, the role of Mary is essential. Father Kentenich quoted very often Pope Pius X when he talked about Vitalis Christi Cognitio, that we can only have a living understanding, a living bond, a living faith in who Christ is, in as far as we allow ourselves to have a living bond to Mary. We have a living and loving attachment to Mary as our mother. There we can consider another level of what the shrine has to say. If we look at the whole setup of how we see shrine, then we see in itself we have a vehicle for evangelization. We just have to know how do I actually put it into practice. One of the things, the first thing that strikes people when they come to the shrine is it's so small. You know, could you not have got it a bit bigger? I remember when we were looking for planning permission to build our shrine near Manchester, we had to go to Bolton Town Council, and we were invited to the debate among the councillors when our case was being considered. And one of the councillors who was backing the permission for our shrine to be built, stood up at one point and he said, "We are talking about a one-storey building." And one of the other councillors stood up and said, "So is Westminster Cathedral." And then he stood up and said, "We're talking about a one-storey building. It's the size of a normal family garage." Why so small? Well, you know, it was given in history, that's where they met. But if you think about it, it really does form a small space which becomes intimate. It becomes a space where we know people who are there. They're not anonymous. They're not numbers. And they are irreplaceable. They're valued. They're cherished. We told Jenny she was missed yesterday when she was flying back from Brazil. There's this whole element of communio personarum. What we want in our evangelization is to create a living community of faith, person to person. Our shrine gives us an essential vehicle for such an encounter. Also then, when we consider the externals of the shrine, that we look at this beautiful altar, picture of Our Lady bringing her Son into our world. And now, in a special way, we consider the open door. The open door of our shrine. We should look at it in terms of evangelization. We want to bring people to an encounter. Our shrine is a place, it's an encounter, and it's a spiritual way. Those are the three things that we considered. So when we're looking at new evangelization, Father Kentrick said two things. First of all, we should have a deep bond of love. But he then also said, but it should be one that we've thought about. It should be one that we have a clear head. We should also have knowledge of this deep love of Mary. We should understand the role of Mary. So that, if you like, our devotion to Mary is enlightened. Enlightened in the depth of our understanding of our faith. And that's essential. Because otherwise you can have all kinds of funny things developing. I remember the last time I was in India where there was a picture of Our Lady that had tears of blood, and there was a whole big explanation as to why this should happen. We have to look very carefully, allow all things to stand that the Church has affirmed as elements of grace and or tolerates. But at the same time, we have to have a clear head, clear understanding that our gift of our attachment to Mary is always about leading us to the heart of her Son. I think that plays an essential role. Then there's the four elements which the Holy Father proclaimed. They kind of follow the Catechism. That's the second chapter of looking at the Year of Faith, looking at the Catechism in terms of the content of our faith, but how also it helps us to live our faith. And there are the 4 steps that are described here in Training for Holiness, where it says, we are invited to profess our faith and give living witness to others. We are invited to celebrate our faith in the sacramental life of the Church, particularly in Holy Eucharist. Many should be brought to the question, why do Christians act like this? And the answer should be, see how they love one another in their love of Christ. We should be brought to a true encounter with Christ, and that then becomes for us the vehicle of credible evangelization. And lastly, waste time with the Master. We should always bring everything to prayer. Let's look at those 4 elements in terms of life around our shrine. To profess our faith in living witness to others. Jesus was a great storyteller. We never think of ourselves as evangelizers who are there to stand up and profess faith. If any of you were invited, many of you would jump back and say, no, leave that to the professionals. I remember when they started the small faith sharing groups in my home diocese, and my mother was asked to be involved, and she says, I'll make the tea. And she became the host, so they met in her home and she made the tea. And she was totally involved in the small faith sharing group. So how do we proclaim our faith? We are actually all very good storytellers. If you listen to all that we talked about now just over lunchtime, we shared our life. We said what's going on in our world. And people see how our faith helps us to conquer each challenge in our life. We are excellent storytellers. We just shouldn't become conscious of being so. Because then we think we've got to do something special, put on a funny voice, and use big words, or become scientific and have footnotes. No. We profess our faith, and then of course we know evangelization first of all takes place, as St. Francis said, in sending out his first young novices. Go and proclaim the gospel, preferably without words. When we think of our family life, when we think of how you are at work, how are you different? And how does your work show up differently? The quality of your work because of your faith. I remember my young brother, he's now a retired police, he's younger than me, he's retired, been logging up in the police. But when he first started, he had a very good training sergeant after he'd done the initial college work. And his training sergeant said to him at one point, as they were walking through the streets together, "Paul, you never need to lie." Anyone who knows anything about the police knows how central that advice is. I think often of that. I never met him, that police sergeant, and I pray for him because he's a good man. Paul, you never need to lie. And I remember him telling me on another occasion where one of his colleagues, who really wanted to capture a crime whom they knew should be behind bars, and they verbalised on him, which means you say more than they actually said to make sure the case goes through. And he came to them afterwards and says, "Don't ever do that with me again. I will expose you in open court." It cost him 6 years of waiting for promotion because he wasn't prepared to tell lies. And I said, "Well, they know when you say something, it's true. And they know that you stand behind what you're saying." We can be great storytellers. First of all, without words. Our sheer presence, who we are, how we allow ourselves to conduct ourselves with that inner dignity given to us as a child of God. That's the quality which makes the difference. They always say the same about Catholic schools. Oh, we know about Catholic ethos. But do you know about Catholic life, Catholic spirit? It causes this ethos to be alive. Not just a straitjacket of rules behaviour. We have to proclaim. And each one of us becomes an apostle of the covenant of love in our own lives. And that proclamation should be about our own lives. And sometimes that can also be because of the way that we have dealt with adversity and the way we have dealt with setbacks, with woundedness, the way we've dealt with being treated unjustly. There are so many occasions where people notice and they take it to heart. And that's where the church becomes credible again, because we know the opposite. When there have been occasions of dreadful scandal and abuse in the church, we lose the believing power of the church. We lose credibility, not just authority. We lose the power to bring live faith to others. Well, the inverse is also true. When we have the fullness and richness of life, it emanates, it radiates. One of the favourite ones of Pope John Paul, it radiates into our world. The light of God radiates. So we are called to profess. And our shrine professes the life of faith and bear witness. Just yesterday when we were discussing things about the motto, Tony reminded us, we built this shrine with our hands. When we tell stories about how this place came about and what it's meant for the lives of those who are attached to this shrine. We proclaim and witness to faith. We become evangelizers. The shrine itself, if you like, stands as a living witness to faith in our times. And there we can take our tradition and the history which we live very seriously. God has spoken through our shrine. We're invited to celebrate faith. Invited to celebrate it in the sacramental life of the Church, particularly in the Holy Eucharist. For Father Kentenich, it was very clear that the celebration of life in the Church is always about not only Sunday, but every day. He said, we should go from the altar of the Eucharist to the altar of our life, the altar of our family. When we share with one another in our family life, we share the Word of God among our family. And when we break bread with one another, then we also share the bread of life in our family. And then, of course, family life itself takes on a new inner dynamic, that it has an ideal of how we want to live, according to this celebration of God in our life, God in the centre of our life. We've mentioned the background of God becoming the forgotten person in our world, the distant one. Indeed, there are those, as we know, who would argue God is dead. There was a campaign in London, in the London buses, the famous ones, double-decker buses. And the campaign said, "There is no God, don't worry, enjoy yourself." So, when we want to celebrate God in our life, celebrate the sacramental life of the Church, but then also let others know and see we celebrate God being in our life. And that means we should also bring it to work. You may have heard recently in Manchester, 2 policewomen were shot. And they were obviously tricked into the situation. They were called to a normal burglary. Police in Britain are not armed, usually. And they were literally shot in cold blood. And the chief of police in Manchester said on television, Sir Peter Fahey is his name, he's Catholic. And someone asked him, how do you deal with this? He said, I say my prayers. And I pray for each of those officers and their family. He publicly let people know he brings his work to Mass with him. And we know he goes to Mass every Sunday with his family. And that means that the celebration of our life, the celebration of the life of the Church and the sacraments, and how it strengthens us and forms us and shapes us, it means that we also bring it as an event of evangelization. As we heard earlier in the words of my mother, I don't know what I would do if I didn't have God in my life. And nowadays we actually have to tell people we have God in our lives. Otherwise they don't know. It's a bit like the situation where now we train people how to be parents and how to be mothers and how to be fathers. Previously you just let them have children and they knew. I don't know if they did. But now we're very conscious they don't. And I remember in my parish in Mount Carmel they came to ask if they could use the parish rooms. And it was to give classes to those parents who were struggling. And they were struggling with everything, how to budget, how to cook, how to train their children, and how to dress their children. They had to learn all those things. And you had to teach them. And nowadays, with things like living our faith, we can't presume we know. Because we don't. One of the first things I hear in baptisms, even in funerals, oh Father, we don't know how to pray. Not we've forgotten, we don't know how. And, if I think of my tradition in going to a Catholic school at the age of 6, we could spell transubstantiation. And, now our teachers report to me the children come and they don't know any of the basic prayers. But then they also, in many cases, don't know any social skills either. According to the developmental age, they should know. And they don't. We have to train them. It's the same with evangelization. We shouldn't presume people know, we should tell them. And we should tell them because they then will find out what the door of faith may be opened for them. So we celebrate our faith in the sacramental life of the church, and we allow that always to flow back into the fullness of our life. For example, that our place of work become a place of our growing in holiness, that our home becomes the cradle of sanctity, that the way we create our society, how we socialise with others, should be the networking of the saints, that we have a very real opportunity, and the shrine plays for us an essential role. And it really does make a difference that when you come to Mass afterwards, if you have a cup of tea and just take time to share with one another. That's the difference. The encounter with Christ. I think the words of the Holy Father to the people in World Youth Day are so important. On the one hand, he said, what you're looking for has a name, has a face, and it's Jesus. When that World Youth Day concluded, he came back to them and they said, you cannot know Jesus and not tell others about him. And then he's looking upon 1 million young people, and he said, the world needs you to tell them. The world needs you to let them know that you know something about a personal encounter of Jesus as your Saviour and friend. And that's essentially, in this whole push, that we all become storytellers so that people really know. I'm not sure how it is in the mentality in South Africa. The mentality in England is that when you meet friends, there are no politics and no religion. Because it always leads to fights and fall-ins. You're allowed to talk about football so long as you always support the same club. Or you call the Liverpools the Scousers for what they are. Then you're doing okay. We have to become storytellers where it's the most natural thing in the world that people know the reason we are as we are. It's not coincidence. It's our faith. It's our friendship with the living God. It's the one, our companion, who walks with us in our life that makes the difference. And lastly, the shrine, our open door to prayer. That one seems obvious. And when we consider the life around our shrine, when we look into the intentions book of the shrine here, we see the shrine as an open door to prayer is so essential. If you consider that, someone said, recently to me, they were, and I can't remember if they're 70 or 75, but they said, I really can't say my prayers anymore. I can go to Mass, I can go to services, I'm really having it difficult. And so we started to talk, what's the relationship between saying my prayers and being prayerful? Well, Kington was very clear on this. He used wonderful, straightforward relationship. I always say it in German first, so I remember it in English. Ausdruck, Mittel und Schutz. He said it as our prayer, saying our prayers, is an expression of our love and our attachment to God. So when we say our prayers, it's like when the child comes next to you and talks to you and tells you all that's gone on that day. The fact that they want to talk means you're important to me. We say our prayers as an expression of that deep relationship. But it's also a means and a way of developing and strengthening that inner relationship to the God of my life. Of course, there's an inner development in our prayer life, where spending time with the Master becomes, for us, perhaps even without words. We're told that St. Teresa of Lisieux wasn't very good at saying prayers. She never got very far. She told the story of kneeling in the chapel and wanted to pray the rosary and said, "Our Father." And an hour later she came out and got no further. Because she allowed her heart to go with the sentiment of our Father and stayed with it for as long as that chimed within her. So obviously, when we develop our prayer life, we use our saying our prayers as the expression of the inner dialogue between me and the God of my life. We use our prayers to properly express and strengthen a way and means of being in that prayerful atmosphere. And of course, it is also a protection that we don't just forget. Because we are wounded in our nature, and there's always the possibility of falling at the next hurdle. Some of us even fall before we get to the next hurdle. And there's St. Teresa of Avila and St. Teresa of Lisieux always give us help right enough, because they say, don't worry, your loving Father will pick you up and carry you for as long as you need. The shrine is an open door to saying our prayers, but the shrine is an open door to being in our prayer with God, our loving Father. We should contain within us an attitude like a school child rushing home to let the parents know what's happened today. And then we should take time to listen. In the book that Father Günther Ball wrote recently, he talked about his first experiences with Father Kentenich. And he said, for the first week I talked, he listened. He said, he hardly even asked a question. And he said, when I reflected on it, then I noticed the power of encounter creating that bond of love. That he listened so actively to the words that I had to say, that then my heart was beating with his heart. And then if we remember that our prayer life allows us to do that, we can tell God, remember with filial boldness, our story. He's listening. And then take time to listen. Our shrine, for us, plays an important part in being a place of prayer. And for the new evangelization, perhaps, we can also look at what are our opportunities. And it needs both. It needs the chance to express the Spirit in words, in song, in action, to come before Lord with an articulated benediction, a prayer, but also to have the opportunity simply to be in God's presence. He looks at me, I look at him. Not to need anything else. There we can see that the shrine plays an important role in that possibility. And I think probably the role of deep faith in believing this is Mary's throne of grace, when we have eye contact with the Blessed Mother in the shrine. We know that her gaze upon us is one of understanding, acceptance, the chance to form us, guide us, educate us. That's our job. First and foremost, the Holy Father says we should train for holiness, or train in holiness. And he also says, and the major educator is Mary. She's the one who, if you like, shows us the way how to live in holiness, both by her own life, also by her own experience. And therefore she becomes the storyteller of her son. You know, there are the wonderful stories, that, for example, that St. Luke got his gospel from Mary, that she told him all the stories. But if you like, we can use such a notion to consider the role of our shrine also in these deeper elements. You know, we were talking about the Second Vatican Council earlier, and we talked about government space. And when the bishops considered all that had to be packed into government space, and there was so much, but they came back and they said, however, we have to remember, the church is not a political organisation, doesn't have a political agenda. The church is not a socio-economic organisation which is going to materially change the world in the first instance. The church is here as the body of Christ to lead humanity into redemption. We're here to save. It's first and foremost a renewal of our religion, our practice of being and living with God. It's a calling that we should know there is something greater and deeper in the foundation of creation, taken up into the heart of God. And from that perspective, then to look at all of the different columns of humanity, of its history, of its economy, its social growth, but always from the point of view, Christ is our Saviour. He heals and He redeems, He elevates and ennobles and brings us into holiness, that we may share that reserved space in the heart of God. I'd like to give these little prayer cards. I thought it's useful for us afterwards. It has both of the prayers we've used this weekend, the pilgrimage prayer you may have already, and the Apostles' Prayer. But I thought it's useful. And then some homework. We have the year of faith, seeking the face of Christ. And now we have to look at what is our response at home and what in my own heart and from the shrine for the church. If I can, if anyone needs copies for someone who's not here, just have them sign. Do we have time or I'm not sure what yeah, well, I would say that's your homework. And your next group meeting, you can report back to one another when you're up to it. You don't have to do, you don't know if you like. We've got, we intend to have closing benediction at 3:15, is that correct? And I think that will be in the shrine. Is that correct? Well, you've got from now till 3:15. If you've got the energy and the warmth, then fill it in now. Probably best Don't put it off. And other than that, you have room for humanity at a short bit. We'll leave it there, otherwise it could go on forever. When we think of these words that were said, and afterwards, that Father Kensley said, well, I carried forward a whole world, a world that I carried in my own heart. Because I knew when I was appointed as spiritual director, now God has taken the initiative. Now God has opened the door, and I've been given my job for life. I remember the first time I read where Father Kensley wrote about this is how he saw it, how he understood, and also how he felt about taking on the job of spiritual director in a minor seminary. God's now telling me what my life is about. With Mary, I have to lead many to the heart of herself by helping them to educate themselves to become free and precious.